Hello, this is Steve Lentini, and I'm your host for Different Thinking for Different Times, Season 2, Episode 30. So, for today's episode, I have a question. Have you developed your own experiment for proof that we live in a miracle? It's called a universe, and even physicists have yet to discover all the laws behind the creation of this thing we live in, right? We are floating on a garden planet around an exposed nuclear fusion plant at the exact right spot for life to occur. And the majority of people, including myself, there's moments where I get stuck in the physical world being real, but when I pause to think about the miracle that we live in fact, that the physicists are as much mystified by it as they are patting themselves on the back for progress about the discovery of its creation and what created it. Remember that when they get there, when they think they've discovered what created it, they're going to ask, well, what created that? What created whatever created this? So it's unending, it's infinite, and you can go back to listen to previous episodes that I've recorded where I had a near-death experience, or what I call a croaking experience, a death experience, where I was in intensive care after 5 days of being taken to the hospital and immediately put in intensive care. And it was the beginning of a 100-day journey, 60 days straight, and then 40 out of the next 60 in and out of the hospital. But anyway, in the fifth day, November 18th, 2002, I was once second in my body, and the next second, I knew I was one with everything and nothing. I had no body, but that part of me remained. Anyway, you can go back to listen to a previous episode and hear more about that experience. But today I wanted to talk about what are you experimenting with? How are you proving your own power? How are you choosing to believe whether you're a victim of circumstance or a master of circumstance? And you can prove to yourself that you live in a miracle, that there are things way beyond our understanding, the infinite, and how we have what I call the acorn brain, which is necessary. The small-minded, limited thinker is also can also shift into the infinite thinker, the limitless thinker. And it's, after all, you who's the thinker of all thoughts. And you can choose which ones you believe. You can build a story about how powerless you are, or you can prove to yourself that you do have power, that you are creating your circumstances to learn and grow from. Because after all, what would the purpose of this existence be? You can choose that it is a victim status that you live by, and that you're powerless and just rail against your own conditions. And imagine to that person how scary it would be to discover that they, in fact, created their own prison. And imagine not knowing. So for anyone who discovers their own power, and that they have, in fact, up until now, created their own prison, or maybe it's even prisons in relationship, but you're doing well on the job, or prisons in your faith, but you're doing well somewhere else in relationship, or prisons of money. Perhaps you have a lot of it and you're still a prison, or maybe you don't have a lot and you've created that prison. But either way, don't take my word for it that we live in a miracle and that we have access to unlimited, limitless abundance and power to create our lives. Prove it to yourself. Begin an experiment. You could just write down what you want to attract. You could call it an attraction plan. You can get a book that actually guides you about that called the Strategic Attraction Plan, or Attracting Perfect Customers, and they outline how to create a strategic attraction plan. I can tell you just write down an attraction plan and read it every day. And start to think big. Write down something on there that would prove to yourself that there's a power much larger than you, because it would just show up. Many years ago, I read the book by John Gray, How to Have What You Want and Want What You Have, and he talked about visualizing things and watching them manifest in your life. And I thought, I was skeptical about that. So I said, all right, I'll visualize something that would be totally impossible. I'll envision. I was doing training for a license I owned, my own business. And I thought I'd envision a customer that would pay me up front $25,000. And then I would also envision a credit line. After all, who would give a credit line to a business owner that had a desk and a telephone? There were no assets. And I certainly wasn't going to give up my house or a lien on my house. I wanted it. I visualized a credit line. That was in September of 2003. Oh, sorry, let me correct that date. It was September of 1998. And in January of 1999, I had the intuition around the third or fourth day of January 1999 to call a client, an existing client, who had been, maybe a $6,000 client the previous year. And I called him and said, Mark, if you were me, who would you call on that would need maybe some sales management consulting? And he had a lot of customers that had sales teams. So that's how I thought that would be the perfect person to call. And he said to me, how about me? I said, well, sure, I hadn't considered that. And he said, well, what would you charge me if you came in every Monday and we worked together? You worked with my team, you worked with me. He said, how much for 6 months? And I said, $30,000. I'm not even sure where that thought came from. It just came out of my mouth. I surprised myself. And he said, well, what kind of a discount would you give me if I paid you up front? And I said, $5,000. So you pay me, I pay you $25,000. I said, yes. He said, well, there's one problem. I said, what's that? He said, are you in the neighborhood? I said, yes. I was in Newburyport. He was maybe 45 minutes away, but that's in the neighborhood to my brain. And he said, I can give you half today and half in 2 weeks. And I said, well, that's fine. I'll be down. See you in an hour. And he said, okay, great. I was in amazement in that ride all the way down. And I left with that $12,500 check and started to see him every Monday. And on the second Monday, he gave me the balance. So there I had manifested in 90 days something that my brain didn't even believe in 100% as I started to visualize it. Now, during the visualization process, I visualized the check. I visualized pay to the order of. I didn't know from who, but I just envisioned a blank check that said pay to the order of Steve Lentini, Prosperity Institute. And I saw the $25,000. I wrote it out in the block in my mind where you put the money. And then I wrote it out visually in my mind, $25,000. Just in the line where you would write out an amount on a check. So having that miracle, I continued to visualize a credit line, which my brain, although enthused, was still believing it's impossible. 6 months later, that same client, as we were renewing my work, he said to me, how you doing? What is it? What are some things that you need? And I said, well, I'm doing well. I could use a credit line to even out the times where there's gaps between getting a client and the next client. He said, well, how much do you need? And I said, $25,000. And he said, make it 20. I said, what do you mean? He said, hold on a minute. He picked up the phone and he put his hand over the receiver for a second. He had already dialed and somebody answered and he said, can I talk to, I don't know, Joe? Obviously was someone he knew. I still didn't know who. He said to me, "Are you heading back to Newburyport?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Can you stop at Wakefield?" He said, "Is Wakefield on the way home, actually?" I said, "Yes." All of a sudden, Joe, let's say, got on the phone and he said, "Joe, Steve Lentini is going to stop by your office in Wakefield and fax me the forms for a credit line for him for $20,000, and I'm going to co-sign for him." And he hung up the phone and said to me, "Okay, stop by Wakefield and you'll have your credit line." I was amazed. I still, as I think about it, in disbelief how that all came together. But of course, I proved to myself the power of visualization. On the way back home, I stopped at that branch bank, left with a checking account and a credit line, and used it as needed for the next 3 or 4 years. So you can have that same kind of an experiment to prove it to yourself. And since then, I've envisioned consulting contracts and clients that would retain me monthly. And all of that has occurred, and things continue to occur. I just have to remember to force myself to not take it for granted and make sure that I discipline some visualization of great things, things that are beyond my belief. And that's what I'm encouraging you all to do, is create an experiment in your mind where you have an attraction plan, you write it down and read it every day. Maybe it's one simple page on a small 5.5 by 8 yellow line pad. One page where you can quickly read it a few minutes every day. Picture some of those things occurring in your mind and make sure one or two of them are big enough so that when they occur, you believe the process, that you yourself are in awe. And then take some of that same awe and excitement as you visualize the next big thing. Make sure that you feel it as if it had already occurred. Make sure that you, even though your acorn brain will try to tell you how crazy it is, make sure that you spend time imagining it happening and how you would feel when it occurred. Feel some of that awe and wonder. And so this is a time to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Festivus for the rest of us, Kwanzaa, a merry or happy Kwanzaa. Whatever it is you believe in is, of course, a wonderful gift. And to know, too, based on my own experience, and you'll have to wait for that to become proof for yourself unless you happen to croak in the next few hours or in the next 5 minutes or even tomorrow. We don't know when it comes. I didn't know that day 18 years ago. But I can tell you that we are certainly here to overcome our acorn brain, our small-minded thinking, and to leave everyone and everything a little better than we find them in every moment, and to stop all these little voices that tell us how different we are and make us angry at others who think differently than we do or look differently than we do or speak differently than we do. We are truly one, and there are no religions, no nationalities, no sexes, no mention of sexual preferences, that anything is right or wrong. There's only the infinite. We come here to experience, and we come here to do good or not. And when we don't, when we do anything that's negative, we get the feedback from it. Cause and effect. That's what this world is. What's next is infinite and way beyond anything that we think of here. But again, you will get that like I did in that moment of death or croaking, or I say we should call it what's next because it's a place. Not like anything here on earth, because nothing from here was there when I went to the infinite. But to work to rise above your own acorn brain, small-minded thinking one way to do it is to prove to yourself that you live in a miracle and there's something way beyond what anybody has discovered. And that will always be so, because we'll always ask, well, what created that? All right, any questions? Steve at stevelentini.com. Steve at stevelentini.com. That's Steve, Steve, at Steve Lentini, LENTINI.com. If you want to come on the show, that's great. Reach out to me. I'll be glad to interview you. And I wish you a wonderful holiday and a great new year. Start to visualize it. Prove to yourself that we live in a miracle. Thanks.